When people think about vampires, they imagine a lot of strange superstitions. That they burn in sunlight, that garlic keeps them away, that they can't enter a house without being invited. But where do these ideas actually come from? In this video, we're going to look at the most famous vampire superstitions and reveal which ones come from old folklore and which ones were simply invented by movies. Let's start with the most famous superstition of all, vampires and sunlight. In movies, it looks dramatic. The vampire steps into the sun and instantly bursts into flames. But in traditional folklore, that wasn't the case at all. Old legends from Eastern Europe describe vampires as creatures of the night. Yes, but they could still walk during the day. The only difference was that they weren't as powerful. So where did the idea of sunlight killing vampires come from? It actually started with the 1922 silent film Nosferatu. In that movie, the vampire is destroyed by daylight, and Hollywood kept that idea ever since. So the bursting into flames thing? Pure cinema, not folklore. Another famous superstition is that vampires have no reflection in mirrors. You've seen it in countless movies. The vampire stands in front of a mirror, and nothing appears. But why? This idea comes from the belief that a mirror doesn't just show your face, it reflects your soul. And since vampires were considered to be soulless, they couldn't appear in the glass. In some old traditions, mirrors were also seen as magical objects, able to trap spirits. So for a creature of the night, standing in front of one would expose what they really are. Of course, this isn't something you'll find in old Eastern European folklore. It's more of a later superstition that was popularized by Gothic stories and eventually Hollywood. Now here's a superstition that sounds almost polite. Vampires can't enter your house unless you invite them in. This idea comes from the belief that a home is a sacred space, protected from evil forces. By inviting a vampire across the threshold, you're basically giving them permission to break that protection. It's not something you'll find in every old vampire legend, but it became a very popular rule in Gothic stories and later in Hollywood movies. So, if you ever meet a vampire at your door, just don't say, "Come in." It might save your life. And of course, garlic, probably the most famous vampire repellent of all. But why garlic? In many Eastern European cultures, garlic was believed to have strong protective powers. People used it to ward off evil spirits, disease, and even the plague. So when the vampire myths spread, it made sense that garlic would be seen as a natural weapon against them. The strong smell, the idea of purity, and its use in rituals made it the perfect anti-vampire tool. Hollywood picked it up, and now we can't think of a vampire without imagining strings of garlic hanging by the door. Probably the most dramatic way to kill a vampire, the wooden stake through the heart. This one's everywhere in movies. A hero plunges a stake into the chest, and the vampire collapses in a shower of fog and sparkle. But the real folklore is messier and a lot older. In many Eastern European traditions, driving a stake through the corpse's heart was a way to make sure the dead stayed dead. People feared the undead would return, so the stake was used to pin the body to the earth, stopping it from rising. Sometimes the stake was driven into the coffin, sometimes directly through the chest, and often it was followed by decapitation or burning. Different cultures preferred different woods. Hawthorn, ash, or oak are common in folktales because certain trees were believed to have protective or sacred qualities. The act was as much ritual as it was violence, often performed by the community or a priest with prayers to close the breach between life and death. Hollywood streamlined and sanitized the image. One stake, one dramatic moment, lights go out. But the real practice was grim, practical, and born from fear of disease and the unknown, not neat cinematic theatrics. Another famous superstition, vampires being terrified of crosses, holy water, or other religious symbols. This belief comes from the idea that vampires are creatures of the damned, beings without a soul, cursed and unholy, so naturally anything sacred or blessed was thought to repel them. In old stories, villagers would protect themselves by wearing crosses, sprinkling holy water, or even surrounding graves with religious icons to stop the dead from rising. Of course, Hollywood loved the image of a vampire hissing and retreating from a crucifix. It's dramatic, and instantly shows the battle between good and evil. But in folklore, the power wasn't in the object itself, it was in the faith of the person holding it. When you picture a vampire, you probably imagine it sleeping in a coffin, but why a coffin? And why the idea that they need their native soil? This comes from old beliefs that the dead must stay connected to the earth they were buried in. If a corpse rose from its grave, it was thought to carry the soil of its homeland with it, a reminder of death, and a way to keep its powers tied to the place it came from. So in many stories, vampires rest in coffins filled with dirt from their homeland. Without it, they would lose their strength or even die. This connection to the grave reminds us that no matter how powerful, a vampire can never fully escape death. One of the most fascinating superstitions is that vampires can change their shape. In some stories, they transform into bats, in others into wolves, dogs, or even a mist that slips through cracks in the door. This belief comes from the idea that evil spirits were not bound to one single form. They could hide, escape, or stalk their victims in many ways. The bat, a creature of the night, and the wolf, a predator feared by villages, became the perfect symbols of a vampire's dark power. There's also a superstition that vampire can't cross running water. In folklore, rivers and streams were seen as symbols of purity, barriers that no evil spirit could pass. So, if you were chased by a vampire, the safest thing to do was to cross a bridge or a river. The water would protect you from whatever it was following in the night. And here's one of the strangest vampire beliefs. If you spill seeds, rice, or salt in front of a vampire, it has to stop and count every single one before it can reach you. This idea appears in several old traditions where obsessive counting was thought to trap evil spirits. So in theory, a handful of seeds could save your life, not because it hurt the vampire, but because it distracted it until sunrise. And finally, vampires feeding on blood. Blood has always been seen as the essence of life. In many cultures, it was believed that drinking blood or stealing it gave power, strength, or even immortality. So when people imagined creatures that rose from the grave, it made sense to think they would crave the very thing that keeps us alive. The vampire's thirst for blood became the ultimate symbol of life and death, and the reason they remain some of the most terrifying beings in folklore. From sunlight to garlic, coffins, and even counting seeds, vampire superstitions are as strange as they are fascinating. Which one surprised you the most? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more dark legends.